The first thing I wanted to ask you about was what the original motivation behind the decision to make a film about Sigur Ros was. Did it come from the band, or from the band's record label, EMI, or from yourself? Or did you simply aspire to be a producer and this was your best chance?
Well, very little comes from EMI, so certainly not ideas-wise. It actually came from the fact that we were doing our last tour with the string section with Amina, and I realised that we hadn't actually got any good footage of the four girls of Amina and the four boys of Sigur Ros playing together, and that if we didn't shoot it soon, we wouldn't shoot it at all, and that would be a shame because it was a great show. So from that little kernel, we thought, okay, so I always feel like Sigur Ros are a special band. They exist in a hermetically sealed sort of environment in Reykjavik, and if we were going to make a film about them, then we should try and make a film that was as good as they were. We didn't actually start with the idea of making it in Iceland. We because Icelandic crowds are actually quite laid back. They're not very enthusiastic. You know, you don't get a huge whooping sort of response to your performance. So we started out thinking that we'd make it in Portugal, because they have fantastic reception in Portugal. But obviously, in knowing what we know now, it was crazy to ever think about making it anywhere else than Iceland.
Did you have any influences that you wished to impose upon it?
The band wanted to have a record of their show, which they thought they'd never see their show because they were on stage doing it. They actually wanted to have a film of what they did on stage so they could look at it from the other side. But I'm like, listen, I've seen it loads and loads of times, and so have all the people who've already come to see the show. So I wanted to do something that was, rather than the view from the back of a hall, looking at the box of a stage, I wanted to do something that was a completely different, much closer up, intimate experience of the band to show. Because I think up until we made this film, people thought of Sigur Ros as being sort of faceless, interchangeable. I don't think anyone really knew anything about who was who, what their names were, what they looked like really. So it was quite important for us to give you that sort of personal introduction to the people who are making this music. The specific films that we looked at was a 1958 film of the Newport Jazz Festival called Jazz on a Summer's Day, which maybe some people have seen, and if they haven't, you should see it because it's a fantastic film. And that was made by a stills photographer called Bert Stern, he was the last guy who shot Marilyn Monroe alive, and he approached every frame like a perfect still shot, and it was all very, very closely framed and very long takes. So it was, which really appealed to me, because Sigur Ros, obviously, as Wyndham alluded to in the introduction, they take a long time to develop their music. So we were all anti the idea of fast editing and fast cutting. That same sort of framing was used in Pink Floyd Live at Pompeii, and that was the other music film that we kind of looked at and thought that was a powerful piece of work. So I won't say we ripped those two films off, but we kind of did. The other film that we referenced was Nicholas Roeg's first film, which was Walkabout, which is about the Australian desert. I don't know if anyone's seen that, but that's a great film.
There is a narrative behind this. It's more than just a story of a band going on tour.
Yeah, you would have thought so, wouldn't you? But I didn't do any of that. We approached this in a very naive way. We watched 3 films, and then we thought, okay, we can do that. So, but all we did was we hired an Icelandic crew for reasons that I just explained. We didn't want, everyone goes to Iceland, and the first time they go there, they were completely wowed by erupting geysers and hot lava and the Blue Lagoon and all of these things. And we didn't want anyone coming in thinking that was what, if you talk to Sigur Ros about that, they'll just think it's completely passé, and they don't really want that in their film. So we talked to a lot of different directors before we made this. We talked to Gus Van Sant and people like that. We talked to there's a video artist called Doug Aitken who actually flew to Iceland with us, and we went to Iceland on Midsummer's Day 2004 in a light plane to look at the light conditions at the top of the island, and it was completely sunshine the whole 24 hours. So at that point we were arguing with the band about whether it should be a record of their performance or whether it should be something else entirely. And because they wanted it to be a record of their performance, we realised we couldn't do it on Midsummer's Day because it doesn't get dark, and therefore the lights wouldn't work. So we shifted it back nearly 2 months, about 6 weeks, to the end of July and early August, so that it got dark about 11 and got light about 2, sort of thing. So so that we could actually perform in the darkness. At that point, the film was only going to be one concert in Ásbyrgi National Park, which is this was how we ended up filming in Iceland. We were going to do it in Portugal. Then Ketan said, you know, I've always had this dream. Ketan's a keyboard player. I've always had this dream that one day we'd play in the national park at Ásbyrgi. I didn't even know what Ásbyrgi was. So he showed me what it was like, and I thought that would be good because it's an amazing canyon in the north. And so we thought, right, let's go to Ásbyrgi. So we went there on Midsummer's Day, too light, so we moved it back. And then we thought, well, if we're going to play in the north, we might as well play in the south. So then we did the show. We had a show in Reykjavik and a show in Ásbyrgi. And then we thought, well, we might as well play on the road rounds. So we ended up doing, you know, shows in between. And then we shot it. We ended up with lots of great performance footage, lots of great sort of like local colour from Iceland, the country. But it was in no way was it a movie. So we had a bit of a problem then.
And that, I think, was the point at which you reached out to Dean Dubois, best known for being the writer and director of Lilo and Stitch, which is a fairly unusual connection for Sigur Ros, I would have said. Although I think you pointed out that Lilo and Stitch is indeed about an island with lava.
It is, yeah. Hawaii and Iceland are very similar.
So how did that come about?
Well, we made this. We didn't know what we'd shot until the end of the tour, and when we went back to the edit suite and started looking at it, I quickly realised that we hadn't really got a film. So we had lots of nice moments, but they didn't really add up to a film. And we tried from September till nearly Christmas, till November at least. I sat in this room for hours every day trying to make a film out of it. And at the end of it, I was not talking to the director anymore. He was not talking to me because I felt that he'd let me down. I think he was close to having a nervous breakdown about it. So I rang up Dean Dubois. Dean Dubois was a fan of Sigur Ros he's Canadian actually, but he lives in LA. And he'd been bugging us about making a video, a promo clip for one of our songs. And he'd come backstage in LA at the Hollywood Bowl, and I thought he seemed super nice. And his job was story development at Disney. And so by this point I'd realised that we hadn't actually got a story to our film. So I rang him up and said, Dean, you've got to help me. We shot 120 hours of footage and we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to make 90 minutes out of 120 hours. At that point, he then started to put structure. He's a theory kind of guy. He knows that you've got to have heroes and things like that in movies. So and villains. So and death. And he kind of found ways of putting all of those things into the film, which when you look at it, it's obvious. And there is death in the movie. There's death of the fishing industry. There's also environmental disasters. We didn't actually set out to. We didn't know any of that was going to seep into the film, and we didn't really want to make a film about Iceland. But we ended up making a film about Iceland, and it was probably better that we did.
There's a sense of politics within the film to a degree. I mean, there's the references, obviously, to the herring factory, which you've mentioned briefly. There's the discussion of the hydroelectric dam that has been built within Iceland. And yet the band themselves previously had never been thought of as a political band. How did they respond to the idea that that's what this film was becoming.
If you're young and Icelandic and smart, you can't avoid these things. Sigur Ros would do anything not to associate themselves with big P politics. They're not interested. They really are not interested. But equally, you cannot. Felt they couldn't stand by and not comment on some of the things that were going on, even if it's only in a tacit way rather than an overt way.
Sigur Ros are not necessarily known for the quality of their interview technique, and certainly I believe that their interview in America with NPR was voted last week as one of the 10 worst interviews ever done. And yet, during the course of this film, you actually get to see a very, very intimate side of the band. They're enormously open, clearly very comfortable talking about the making of the film and the experience of touring. I mean, obviously they know you better, but how was it that they suddenly became so enormously open in comparison to how they have been with journalists?
The band were very loath to be interviewed. They hate being interviewed. But I think we made them see that if it wasn't said out of their own mouths, then, you know, I was actually interviewed for the film, and there was an earlier version when I'm in it throughout. But because I speak English as my first language, my voice seems so sort of like jarringly articulate in comparison to their own, because they're kind of like faltering, and that's kind of one of the charms. So we made a decision to take me out of it, and which is absolutely the right decision, and it was really just down to the personal connection that Dean had with the boys, particularly with Jonsi. Dean's gay, Jonsi's gay. They go out clubbing together. They really like each other. Everyone was filmed in their own. No, they weren't. Captain and Jonsi are filmed in their own houses, so there was, it's an easy process, really.
Are there any things about the movie that you're unhappy with, that you wish you'd done differently?
Yeah, lots and lots of things I'm unhappy with. When I just see everything that's wrong with it. It's not the film that we set out to make by any means. It's a completely different film. It's kind of a bit saccharine, I think. It does dwell on, having said that we didn't want to make a film that dwelt on Icelandic nature, we definitely have that in it, and I think maybe too much. It's a little bit Disneyfied. But we only shot what we shot, and we had to make a film with what we got. If anyone's trying to make a film, you know, I'm sure there's never been a film made that actually was turned out, or maybe a Stanley Kubrick movie, but films that are shot for shot what they started out thinking they were going to make. Things moved and changed all over the place.
Did you ever feel like you were trying to deliver a message with this film that was perhaps far bigger than the band itself?
Well, I think, you know, it's all part of that, allowing the listener to the records or the viewer to the film to have space. You know, you don't want to insult their intelligence. You want to present stuff that's got room for them to move around in and draw inspiration or interpretations from.
What was the critical response to the movie like in general? Did people like it, or did they find it overwrought, or they? No,
it was crazy good. We got my favourite thing was that I think what's the guy? Is it Alexander Walker? There's some famous film.
Evening Standard writer.
Yeah, one of the big UK movie reviewers, I've forgotten his name, said that it reminded him of Jazz on a Summer's Day, and I'm like, yes! Because that's exactly what I wanted it to be like.